Hi, I'm Steve Rose. Thank you for asking me to speak today, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but it looks like you're having a full and exciting day. I want to talk a little bit about a project that I've been involved in, and I've called this talk Online Family Partnership, a collaboration focused on tactile communication. I just want to say a little bit about my background. So I'm a speech and language therapist, and I have two roles. I work at Great Ormond Street Hospital in the neurodisability service, and I also spend a little bit of time working independently as a speech and language therapist and deafblind consultant. I have a real focus on development with an emphasis on children, but not exclusively. Some of those children are getting older. And I really focus on communicative potentials and how people relate to each other. And that's a real interest of mine. Okay, a little bit about what we're talking about today. I'm going to talk about an example of collaborative practice supporting a deafblind boy's journey, creating shared meaning using tactile communication. We're going to share an approach to assessment and describe some assessment tools that help demonstrate his potential in the tactile mode. We're going to explore some of the benefits of this approach as shared by his mother, and there's also a chance to signpost to some resources. So this whole project kind of came from a school who got in touch with me, and it was just as kind of we were still in the pandemic, but the question was really, can we think about doing something that's a bit different in this new online world that helps us pull together communication strategies and seek agreement amongst the team about a way forwards together? And we really wanted to look at a young man's communication from a tactile perspective and support everyone's observations and understanding of what was happening. So this is our focus, the young man in question. This is a joyful young man who is a thrill seeker and adventurer. He's a lover of bass music, swimming, big movements and bouncing. At the outset, when I first meet him via our online project, he's described as being nonverbal, an emergent communicator. He has some on-body signs and some objects of reference using whole objects. Medically, he has a diagnosis of Norie's disease. He has profound vision level. He has a moderate hearing level. And he has autism, learning disability, and some mobility difficulties due to a tight Achilles tendon, which was released through the process of our project. But overall, he's a resilient and determined young man. And with his parents behind him, he's currently planning to climb Ben Nevis. So I think that's a wonderful achievement. So who's on the team? It's actually a really big team, potentially. So we had Mum. We had myself, we had the teacher of the deaf, the Senko who chaired the team, class teacher, school intervener, social intervener, QTVI, VI teacher, but we also had some intermittent input from the learning disability nurse, the habilitation worker, and also the music therapist. So, how did we approach what we did? We decided that we would have MDT access to a video sharing platform, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But that allowed us to do some video microanalysis to really look at what was happening in some videos, to really undertake some tactile assessments in the virtual realm. That kind of led to having some online family and MDT meetings, which we actually held on a termly basis to establish shared goals and plans. And it then became a cyclical process of meetings and videos, meetings, goals. So this is an example of the video sharing platforms called Seesaw. And it's a little bit like a Facebook, but it's private for home and school liaison between children and their families. But it allowed mum and school to upload some videos of things that were happening, and it allowed us to look at those and share them between us really nicely. Some of the assessment tools we used, the first one was the Tactile Working Memory Scale. It's an observational scale for identifying bodily tactile working memory in everyday occurrences and during social interactions. In some ways, it's can be quite a dynamic assessment, but it can also be used in an ecological way. So looking at videos and reviewing them, as the people around the individual are kind of as much of the tool as anything else. And I suppose the main thing that the assessment does is it allows us to identify strategies and test them out a little bit as part of the assessment process. And overall, it helps us work out and observe really the potential that someone has to learn and what opportunities we can create to help them make best use of their tactile potential. Last year I attended the first supervisor training of the tactile working memory scale, and I think that's this was part of my learning, so it was a bit of learning for everyone, but hopefully it was a really helpful tool for us all. We also used a framework for learners developing bodily tactile communication and tactile sign language skills, which is a piece of work I'm sort of working on in the background for the last couple of years. But it's a framework of trying to look at how communication emerges and develops, and then how we move that forward through into using tactile sign language. So what happens in a meeting? So the meetings were chaired by the Senko, who very skillfully and helpfully kind of navigated the whole team for us. But within that, we each took a turn to offer an update and identify current priorities. We would look at key videos shared since the last meeting and discuss our observations, each sharing our different viewpoints, which kind of brought a really rich multidisciplinary dynamic to what we were seeing. Through that conversation, we would agree what progress had been made, what actions we might need to take, and our next steps. And kind of we all signed up to that, and what support needed to be put in place to make that happen. After the meeting, I'd share a short summary of the discussion and an action plan, and we'd agree a meeting for the next day. And that kind of became a cycle for us every term over the duration of the project. So, where were we at the beginning? At the beginning, I think it was quite clear from video observations that our young man was aware that his hands carried meaning. There was some early use of signs. He was using the on-body sign for more to request repetition of activities and objects. And he was also showing individual expressions linked to experiences, which we'll have a look at in just a second. He was aware that objects carried meaning, so he was using some objects of reference. We also saw really clearly in the videos that he was, from someone who had a history of being tactile defensive, he was actually a really active tactile explorer. And he was also showing a positive response to sound after recently being given hearing aids and exploring that in music and pleasure sessions. So what were our goals? Our next step was really to provide him more access to sign language, to kind of give him more access and exposure so that he could kind of get access to language in the tactile way. We did this, so we included a joining in routine, so creating a way to work with him, using hand-under-hand exploration and listening to his hands so that we could create shared and joint attention. We also talked about how to confirm his expressions, so showing that I recognise that you're sharing something. We might not always know what it is, but it was about recognising that his hands had the power as much as our hands had the power. And it was also about expanding the function where he was using and who he was using the signs that he was already using. In terms of listening, we looked at expanding listening experiences and maximising his use of hearing aids. And I say through our discussion, we acknowledged the limitations of the role of objects and talked about exploring tactile symbols a bit more to increase his kind of vocabulary in that mode. Here's a very short video of our young man, and here we can see him just exploring a rice cake here, but you can see some of his lovely tactile exploration. Here he's bashing it against his hand, feeling the shape, testing the depth, and looking at the crevices and tracing the contours of the shape of the object that he's exploring. So that's kind of how he gets impressions of what's going on. But he's also, there's a little testing gesture. You can see he's almost thinking about the object that he's just felt. So there's kind of an expression that's coming related to his experience. And here are just some of the snapshots of those images. So you can see he's making an impression of the object that he's holding, but then also he gets this kind of trace or this expression that comes from kind of having that experience with the object. Over time, what did that mean? It meant that he began to combine two signs for more and food in home, school, and the community. He was also using more with a wider range of people in more places and for increasingly more things. And I think there was just a wider awareness amongst the team of his individual expressions. He was accessing hand-under-hand exploration in lots of different settings and demonstrating his tactile learning potential. His hearing aid wearing became a little bit more intermittent. We weren't quite sure what was going on for him, but there was a bit of something happening. And he also began to recognise the introduction of tactile symbols, so partial objects mounted on board. So he was beginning to kind of broaden his kind of tactile symbol knowledge. And I just want to show this little video where he's shining more and then with a little bit of guidance asking to eat. And so he's beginning to combine two signs, which was a really exciting step for us. His intervener starts to intervene there and he says, no, I'm not interested, thank you very much. But then a little bit later, she signs more, and then independently, he signs the eat sign. So he's beginning to put those two elements together. And there's just some steps. So in the top row here, you can see him signing more, and then she supports him to kind of go eat. And then the next sign, the second sign, he signs more, and he does the little double tap with his other hand before she's even ready. But she does acknowledge that she sees it by listening to his hand to confirm what she's seen. And then finally, what are the recommendations for the next steps? So the recommendations that he carries on accessing BSL. We've established some shared practice about how we do that. We're also looking at structuring learning, where things come from, where they go from, so that the activity routines have a start and end points. And also looking at location markers and mobility cues around school. There's some mutual shared meaning making, and that's a kind of an important part of our overall process. And we're also now focusing on increasing his hearing aid wearing as he's coming up for a cochlear implant assessment. And then finally, we're beginning to explore the role of the tactile calendar. Now that we have more symbols available, it allows us to look at other things for him. So it was a really exciting little project and thinking about what happened for him. But what did Mum think? Because I think that was a really important player within our team. And we just asked Mum a few questions. And one of the things about how easy was it to use the video platform, and actually she found it really easy to share the videos. The only downside to this is that they're limited to 2 minutes, but she chose videos that highlighted his personality or really captured an activity he was doing. How about understanding him? And she said, it really helped me understand the importance of listening and watching his hands and body movements to realise that he's actually communicating something I may have missed before. It also helped me show him that I am listening to what he's trying to tell me. And finally, what was the most successful part of the meetings? And she said, it's been getting everybody involved in his care together in one place to share experiences. It's often difficult to get the timings right for face-to-face meetings. And then finally, what difference did the communication meetings have for him? His communication has really flourished over the last year. It's been great to get various people's perspectives of what they think he might be communicating, as everyone brings something different to the table. Most importantly, it's helped the team around him at home and school to be really clear and consistent with teaching new signs and how we also all react to his hands, which has helped him progress so much. Videoing his communication has really helped us all to step back and really analyse situations to help us gain a better understanding of him. It's definitely helped me feel better connected with him and strengthened our bond. So there were some really lovely comments there, which were really reassuring, I think, for us as a team. But from my reflections, thinking about how this work's happened, I think some of the things that have really struck me, just sharing our different perspectives in an open forum allowed us to foster a cohesive plan and shared goals, which was really great. Video was really integral to micro-analysis of interactions to make sense of what we see in the tactile mode. And also, it's possible to make sensible observations about tactile learning and communication in an online forum, something I think we were all a little bit surprised about. But also, I think importantly, small steps and ideas led to meaningful and productive improvements. And I think the credit really goes to the motivation and commitment of the team and the individual to really kind of put everything into place and keep things moving forwards. I was just going to talk a little bit about some resources, and if you're interested in the framework for learners developing tactile bodily communication and tactile sign language skills, that's available on my personal website, which there is a link for it here on the screen. I've also included some useful web links for other helpful tools about thinking around tactile communication, including the Tactile Working Memory Scale and the NatSIP Tactile Signing Project information product. Thank you so much for letting me speak to you today about this project. It's been a really exciting piece of work for me, but importantly for the young man involved. I hope it's helpful, and I wish you a happy rest of conference today. And it's me again, back in my other role, in my Great Ormond Street role. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the clinics that are available at Great Ormond Street that might be of interest to parents of children who've got sensory impairment. So the first, within neurodisability, there are a couple of clinics that might be quite helpful. The first is the Developmental Vision Clinic, and that's a specialist clinic for children with vision disorders and impairment. And it's around assessment of children's development. So if there are questions around learning, development, other kind of diagnoses that might be going on, it's a good clinic for exploring those things. The other clinic which might be helpful is the Developmental Communication Service, which is a communication assessment service for children with motor but also other learning and sensory disabilities. And it's either a second opinion service for local speech therapists referring in, or for families who are requesting more ideas in support with their local team. But it's a helpful clinic to kind of really answer very specific questions around communication, such as what's the best way forward for my child to communicate, or are we missing anything in the communication package, those sorts of things. Other services and clinics at Great Ormond Street, obviously there's the cochlear implant programme, which is part of one of many regional cochlear implant programmes. But recently the referral criteria for a cochlear implant has changed, so that's kind of increasing referrals to that service. There's also dual sensory clinic, which has been piloted at Great Ormond Street. And this is a clinic that's really looking at kind of diagnostic questions around underlying causes of deafblindness. It's an audiology and ophthalmology clinic, so you see both of those streams within the same day. And it's, as I say, it's an exploratory clinic, but it's there for questions around underlying diagnosis. There's also a multidisciplinary clinic for children with Bardet-Biedl syndrome. And then I've also put in the contact details for audiology and ophthalmology for the range of services that are provided at that level in that whole service. And finally, there's just a handout with all quick links to all of those services, which might be helpful for you. Thank you very much.